the differences and whether you should consider upgrading or not. So I bought this one back on 11/11, and I actually bought it from the Luck LZ store, but kind of ignore all that. So on Black Friday in a few days, this guy will be back to $24.67, which is about what it was on 11/11. You can look on Luck LZ store on Black Friday. You'll see it for that price, but please look up and see where it is the cheapest that you feel the most comfortable buying from. I bought it because that was the cheapest on that day. So that is the story on the DT6 Pro. Comes in a couple, I think, new colors: silver, blue, black. I think this is actually the black color. So if you have the DT6, you'll kind of remember that these are sort of bigger, substantial alloy shells. I kind of like it. You're actually meant to wear these down, so which is super convenient if you're used to wrapping things around your ears. So the Pro, and from all the pictures, it kind of looked like a prototype. It looked kind of weird in the pictures, and I wasn't all that keen on the design of the shell. But in person, it's metal again. It's just a lot more rounded. It's got a kind of bigger grill on the back. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I actually like the old design better, but I was sort of pleased that it actually looks better than the pictures do. So that is that. These are the KZ Star tips. I don't remember the tips that were on there were no good. Cable-wise, this is the TRN T2 in this pewter color. So it seems like it's a pretty good match to everything. It's kind of a silver on silver view of the DT6 Pro, so I like it. Again, these are MMCX connectors, which is what the old one was as well. And these are actually, the T2 comes with ear hooks, so you can wear this around the ear as well, and I have, or you can be lazy and just stick it in your ear like I did. So it's kind of the basics of what it looks like. Definitely better in person than it does in the pictures. So let's kind of get to, the most important questions. One, did Senfer ruin the DT6? And the answer to that is a maybe, depending on what you're looking for. And two, did Senfer fix the DT6? Because if you remember, half the people really hated the DT6 because it does weird things to natural instruments, and half the people hated it. So the quick answer is no. It sounds, probably 95%. The Pro sounds about 95% similar to this guy. There's a couple changes, and we're going to get to those in a second. But in general, if you were looking for a more natural sounding DT6, that's not the Pro. The Pro is, what it sounds like is actually what it was, and it's the DT6 with an extra balanced armature. And so if we look at a couple songs, and we'll talk about those specific changes. So Kygo's Firestone, if you listen to it on the DT6, it actually sounds perfectly fine. If you listen to it on the DT6 Pro, the first thing you're going to notice is that there's a pop in the high frequencies. So that song starts off, there's kind of a bass, kind of a low bass beat going on. There's a little vocals there. And then you'll hear some high frequency, I think, claps and snaps and bells and other notes that are kind of in the higher frequencies. And those kind of jump out at you now, whereas they didn't on this. And that was sort of my first thought on the DT6 when I first got it was, this thing is a tri-brid, right? It's a dynamic driver, a balanced armature, and a piezo plate, which was supposed to handle the high frequencies. But the first thing you noticed was the treble doesn't really stand out on this guy. It's kind of a bassy sound, kind of a thick, rich bass sound. It never really popped in the treble side, and they rolled it off politely, and I think that works for a lot of music. People are really buying this for the bass, not so much screaming, soaring treble. So I think that actually worked for a lot of people. So this guy, you kind of get a similar sound, but now like they almost completed the second arm of the V, right? So this was a V shape, but the bass was kind of boosted. This is more of a bass and a treble boosted. So now this actually sounds like it has a piezo plate, and you're probably not even, in that song, I'm guessing you're not even hearing it, you're just hearing the extra balanced armature. But those high frequency sounds definitely come through. They're much sharper, much brighter than they were on this. And if you switch back and forth like I was doing, this almost has a dark tone to it when you go back and forth. And it really doesn't on its own. It actually doesn't. But just that bassy, thick notes sound, a little dark compared to some of the brightness that you're going to get through on here. So that's sort of both the good and the bad, right? So if you love this for that mellow treble and the really bass sound, this has now amped up the treble a little bit. So depending on what your music is, that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. And there was one guy on HeadFi who was talking about, I think he listens to hard rock, maybe heavy metal. So this, for screaming guitars was probably a better fit for him, because when he switches here, now he's getting some high frequencies that didn't exist before. So now the layering and the imaging and the sibilants all play a role, whereas they didn't on the original one. But for something like Kygo's Firestone and the rest of these songs, I didn't really notice that in the electronic dance genre. So I would sort of caution you if that was your main thing. And I don't think the DT6 was all that great for actual instruments and bands, but he was using it and quite liked the DT6. But for me, it's kind of all electronic or nothing. And I think it's just the way the music is in electronic, where you may have a bass beat and then you have sounds and samples, and all these things are kind of weaved together. It's not like a band, not like a guitar playing constantly in your head. So I think it all works better on electronic, but just kind of my opinion on that. So Kygo's Firestone, listen to the very beginning of it, and you'll hear some of these high frequency sounds, and those kind of pop at you right away as one of the main differences between the DT6. So Sweet Dreams by Beyonce, that was one of the original songs that I loved on the DT6. And I love it kind of even more on the DT6 Pro because it's that contrast. It's that thick bass with her voice. She's got that high, sweet voice. And hearing the two together is sort of why I love the DT6 and I love the Pro. And so did they ruin the DT6? Specifically love that? No, it probably sounds better because her voice is a little brighter, a little more sharper. There's even more contrast between her voice and that bass beat going on. So yeah, I literally tried the DT6 Pro for 2 minutes. I'm like, oh, this thing is just as much fun as the DT6. It's just a little different, but if you don't have the DT6, I would probably go with the Pro. If I had the DT6, it's kind of a maybe. I mean, for me, I like the way this sounds a little better because now I'm hearing, especially coming from playing with the TRN BA5, which is all 5 BAs, and hearing some of those really sharp treble notes. It's nice to hear those on the DT6 Pro. So yeah. So second area where they sort of changed is the bass. So this guy was super bassy, and when it went really low, it kind of went a little loose, a little wild, a little out of control. So Hey Now by London Grammar was one of those songs that I picked up on the original one, where kind of at its lowest part, it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound good. The sub goes way out of control into a sound that doesn't really sound like sub bass anymore. So what I think they did on the DT6 is on the Pro is they don't let it go down as far as they did. So I'm pretty sure the extension on this extends further than it does on this. So that's another one of those things. Did they ruin this by kind of cutting off the sub bass from going into something that didn't sound bad? That's kind of a judgment call. I think Hey Now sounds better on here just because it was noticeable on here. When it went that low, you're like, it just doesn't sound right. Something is off there, and it's just the sub bass getting out of control. So they don't let it get down as far, so you don't get as much rumble. It still rumbles, but it just doesn't get wild and out of control. So, that's another one of those things where I'm okay with it, but you have to kind of think about, if you had the DT6, do you really want something with, a tad less extension in the sub bass? At the trade-off is it's definitely more control, slightly tighter, but 95% of it is exactly the same. That was just, and I think they pointed that out on Head-Fi too, and that was one of his issues with the Head-Fi extension. The sub bass extension didn't extend as much as the DT6 original, but I don't know. It's a trade-off, and I will probably take the sharper treble for a little less out of control sub bass. I think that was a pretty fair trade-off. So yeah, in general, is the Pro an upgrade? For me, it was. For you should probably think about what you loved about the DT6 and whether you really love that polite, rolled off, mellow treble, because it never gets fatiguing. There's never sibilance. It's super polite, but super mellow, versus something where the treble is amped up a little bit. So now you hear some of those high frequency sounds at a much higher level than you did on here. So if your music has more of that, maybe you'll be more sensitive to it, and maybe you want to stick with the DT6. But I think that's about it. Here in the US, we have Thanksgiving, so if you're with your family and friends, enjoy that. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you.